The Trillian diplomat's iridescent skin shimmers as she considers the human's audacious invitation to his bed. Matthew Scora, Earth's envoy to Trillia, stands before her in the medbay, his muscular frame bearing fresh bandages. The air crackles with tension, their mutual attraction palpable in the sterile room. Mere hours ago, Matthew arrived on Trillia for peace negotiations. The tall, slender Trillians greeted him with wary glances, their suspicion evident in their elongated features. As Matthew took the podium to deliver his speech on Earth's peaceful intentions, he locked eyes with Ella, the lead translator. Her striking beauty captivated him, her translucent skin glowing softly in the dim light of the reception hall. The calm shattered as Trillian extremists burst through the doors, energy weapons raised. Without hesitation, Matthew lunged towards Ella, shielding her from a searing blast. Pain erupted in his shoulder as the energy singed his flesh, but he remained focused. Years of military training kicked in as he disarmed the nearest attacker with swift, precise movements. The Trillians watched in awe as the human diplomat, now turned warrior, subdued the extremists with ease. The remaining attackers fell quickly to the combined efforts of Matthew and the security forces. As the dust settled, accusations flew. Trillian leaders pointed fingers at the humans, claiming the attack was a ploy. Matthew, blood seeping through his torn uniform, vehemently denied the allegations. His voice rang out, firm and unwavering, despite the pain coursing through his body. Ella, moved by his bravery and drawn to his raw physicality, stepped forward. Her melodic voice cut through the chaos as she defended Matthew, recounting his selfless actions. The Trillian Council, swayed by Ella's impassioned testimony and Matthew's heroic deeds, agreed to continue negotiations under heightened security. As the adrenaline ebbed, Matthew's wound demanded attention. Ella offered to escort him to the medical bay, her slender hand supporting his broad frame. In the quiet of the medbay, Ella tended to Matthew's injury. Her gentle touch sent shivers down his spine, igniting a fire within him. The attraction between them grew with each passing moment, transcending their biological differences. Under the influence of pain medication, Matthew's inhibitions lowered. He gazed into Ella's mesmerizing eyes, a mix of alien allure and familiar warmth. With a voice husky from exertion, he extended an invitation that would change everything. "Ella," Matthew said, his words slightly slurred, "I'd like to continue our cultural exchange. Would you join me in my quarters tonight?" The forwardness of this brutal human left Ella speechless. She stared at Matthew, her mind racing with the implications of his request. More than just a night of passion hung in the balance. The future of human-Trillian relations could hinge on her decision. As Ella contemplates her response, the fate of two worlds teeters on the edge. Will she accept Matthew's invitation and bridge the gap between their species, or will she retreat, leaving both sides in continued suspicion and mistrust? Ella's luminescent eyes flickered with a mix of emotions as she processed Matthew's bold invitation. The air in the medbay seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken tension. After a moment that stretched like an eternity, she finally spoke, her voice a soft melody. "Matthew, I accept your invitation." The human diplomat's eyes widened, a smile spreading across his face despite the lingering pain from his injury. Ella helped him to his feet, her cool touch sending a shiver through his body. They made their way out of the medbay and into the corridor, walking close enough that their arms occasionally brushed against each other. The hallways of the diplomatic complex were bathed in a soft, otherworldly glow that seemed to emanate from the very walls. As they walked, Matthew found himself stealing glances at Ella, marveling at how her iridescent skin shimmered with each step. Upon reaching Matthew's quarters, they entered a spacious room adorned with a mix of human and Trillian decor. An awkward silence fell between them as the door slid shut. Matthew, determined to break the ice, gestured to a small table near the window. "Would you like to sit? I thought we could start with a little cultural exchange." Ella nodded, gracefully taking a seat. "I would enjoy that, Matthew. Perhaps you could tell me about human customs?" As they talked, the initial awkwardness melted away. Matthew explained Earth traditions, from handshakes to holiday celebrations, while Ella shared fascinating insights into Trillian society. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and moments of shared wonder at their differences and similarities. As the night wore on, their discussion turned to more personal matters. Matthew found himself captivated by Ella's description of trillion relationships, so different yet oddly familiar to his own experiences. "And what about human intimacy?" Ella asked, her gaze meeting Matthew's with an intensity that made his breath catch. He leaned in closer, drawn by an irresistible force. "Perhaps it's better if I show you." Their lips met in a kiss that sent sparks through Matthew's entire body. Ella's skin glowed brighter, her form seeming to shimmer with an inner light. As they pulled apart, both breathless, a sudden beeping filled the room. Ella's communicator flashed urgently. She answered, her expression shifting from contentment to alarm as she listened to the message. Turning to Matthew, her eyes wide with concern, she explained the situation rapidly. "A rogue Trillion faction has seized control of our planetary defense installation. They're threatening to use it against your delegation unless we halt all negotiations." Matthew's military instincts kicked in immediately. "We need to act fast. I'll volunteer to lead a team to retake the installation." Ella's brow furrowed. "You're injured, Matthew. It's too dangerous." "All the more reason for me to go. It'll show the Trillions that humans are committed to this alliance," Matthew argued, already moving to gather his gear. "Then I'm coming with you," Ella declared, her tone brooking no argument. "You'll need a liaison and translator." After a brief communication with the Trillion Council, their plan was approved. Matthew and Ella quickly found themselves in a strategy room, surrounded by a mix of human and Trillion operatives. As they outlined their plan, the team watched with a mix of curiosity and admiration at how seamlessly the human and Trillion worked together. Matthew's tactical expertise complemented Ella's deep knowledge of Trillion technology and protocol. They moved around the holographic display of the installation, fingers occasionally brushing as they pointed out key locations and potential weaknesses. As the team prepared to depart, Matthew pulled Ella aside. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a smooth river stone from Earth, its surface etched with intricate patterns. "It's a good luck charm," he explained, pressing it into her hand, "to keep you safe out there." Ella's skin pulsed with a warm glow as she accepted the gift. She reached out, her slender fingers brushing Matthew's forehead in a gentle touch. "And this is a traditional Trillion blessing," she murmured, her eyes locked with his. "May your path be clear and your heart be strong." The moment was interrupted by the call to board their transport. As they entered the vessel, specially modified to accommodate both species, Matthew couldn't help but feel a surge of anticipation. Despite the danger ahead, he felt more alive than he had in years. As the transport lifted off, Ella suddenly gripped Matthew's arm. "Matthew, look at these energy readings," she said, pointing to a display. "The rogue faction has activated the ion cannon." Matthew's mind raced, quickly assessing the new threat. He turned to Ella, a plan already forming. "We need to change our approach. You and I will infiltrate through a maintenance tunnel while the rest of the team creates a diversion." Ella nodded, her trust in Matthew evident. As they prepared to separate from the main group, their eyes met. In that silent exchange, volumes were spoken, of trust, of growing affection, and of the challenges that lay ahead. As Matthew and Ella slipped away from the group, moving silently towards the maintenance access point, the weight of their mission pressed upon them. The fate of two worlds rested on their shoulders, their growing bond now the linchpin in a delicate interstellar alliance. As Matthew and Ella slipped away from the main group, the dimly lit maintenance tunnel stretched before them like an artery through the heart of the defense installation. The narrow passage forced them to move in single file, with Matthew taking the lead. His broad shoulders nearly brushed the walls, while Ella's lithe form glided silently behind him. The air grew thick with tension, not just from the impending danger, but from the electric current that seemed to pulse between them. Every time Matthew paused to check their surroundings, Ella's body pressed against his back, her breath warm on his neck. The closeness was intoxicating, but Matthew forced himself to focus on the mission at hand. "We're approaching the first junction," Matthew whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of distant machinery. "Stay alert." Ella nodded, her luminescent skin casting a soft glow in the darkness. As they rounded the corner, a metallic whir caught their attention. Matthew's hand shot out, pulling Ella back just as a sleek silver drone zipped past their hiding spot. "Security drones," Ella breathed, her eyes wide. "They're not supposed to be in this section?" Matthew's mind raced, assessing the new threat. "Can you interface with them? Shut them down?" Ella's fingers danced over a small device on her wrist. "I can try, but they've been modified. It might alert the main system." "We don't have a choice," Matthew replied, his eyes scanning the tunnel. "Do it." As Ella worked, Matthew watched in awe as her skin pulsed with a soft blue light, matching the rhythms of the data streaming across her device. Suddenly, the drone stuttered in midair, its lights flickering before going dark. "Impressive," Matthew grinned, unable to hide his admiration. Ella's skin flushed a deeper hue. "It's not over yet. There are more ahead." Together they moved through the tunnel, disabling drone after drone. Matthew's combat instincts complemented Ella's technological expertise perfectly. As they approached the control room, Matthew gathered the disabled drones, an idea forming in his mind. "We can use these for a diversion," he explained, quickly outlining his plan. Ella nodded, her eyes shining with understanding. "And I can distract the guards. Some of them might be sympathetic to our cause." As they reached the entrance to the control room, Matthew set to work on the drones while Ella approached the guards. Her melodic voice carried through the air, her words carefully chosen to appeal to their sense of duty and honor. "Brothers, why do you stand against peace?" she asked, her tone gentle yet firm. "Surely you see the benefits of cooperation with the humans?" The guards shifted uneasily, their weapons lowering slightly as they listened to Ella's impassioned speech. In that moment of distraction, Matthew activated the reprogrammed drones, sending them buzzing chaotically around the room. Chaos erupted as the guards scrambled to respond to the perceived threat. In the confusion, Matthew and Ella slipped into the control room unnoticed. The scene that greeted them sent a chill down Matthew's spine. Commander Zorn, a towering Trillian with battle scars crisscrossing his iridescent skin, stood at the main console. His fingers flew over the controls, the massive ion cannon visible through the view screen. Its muzzle pointed ominously at the human delegation's ships. "We have minutes, maybe less," Ella whispered urgently. Matthew nodded, his body tensing for action. "I'll handle Zorn and his men. You focus on shutting down that cannon." With a shared look of tenacity, they sprang into action. Matthew launched himself at Zorn, his fist connecting with the commander's jaw in a bone-jarring impact. The other guards rushed to their leader's aid, but Matthew's superior strength and agility kept him one step ahead. As the fight raged on, Ella raced to the control panel. Her fingers flew over the alien interface, her brow furrowed in concentration. The targeting system resisted her attempts to override it, each failed attempt bringing the ion cannon closer to firing. Matthew grunted as a blow caught him in the ribs, but he pushed through the pain. He caught a glimpse of Ella's frustrated expression and called out, "Try thinking like a human." Ella's eyes widened at his words. In a flash of inspiration, she began inputting commands that combined Trillian logic with human unpredictability. The system faltered, then yielded to her unorthodox approach. "It's done!" Ella shouted triumphantly as the ion cannon powered down. Matthew seized the moment of distraction to land a final decisive blow on Zorn. The Trillian commander crumpled to the ground, his men quickly following suit. As the dust settled, Matthew and Ella found themselves standing amidst the unconscious forms of their enemies, chests heaving from exertion. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the full weight of what they had accomplished crashed over them. Without a word, they moved towards each other. Matthew's strong arms encircled Ella's waist as her hands found his shoulders. Their lips met in a kiss that defied the boundaries of their species, a perfect fusion of human passion and Trillian grace. The sound of approaching footsteps broke them apart. The rest of their team poured into the control room, securing the area and tending to the subdued rogue faction. As the gravity of the situation settled over them, a new tension filled the air. The political ramifications of their actions loomed large, threatening to overshadow their personal breakthrough. "Matthew? Ella?" a stern voice called from the doorway. They turned to see representatives from both the human delegation and the Trillion High Council entering the room. Your presence is required immediately for an emergency meeting. Exchanging a look of shared apprehension and purpose, Matthew and Ella moved to follow the officials. As they walked side by side, their hands brushed against each other, a small gesture that spoke volumes. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, a living embodiment of the bridge between their two worlds. As they entered the council chambers, Matthew felt Ella's hand slip from his, leaving a lingering warmth that steeled him for what was to come. The room fell silent as they stepped inside. Rows of seats arranged in a semicircle faced a central podium, occupied by both human and Trillion officials. Matthew recognized some faces from the human delegation, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. The Trillion High Council members sat opposite, their iridescent skin reflecting the room's soft light. "Captain Matthew Reeves, Liaison Elizareth, please step forward," a stern voice commanded from the podium. As they moved to the center of the room, Matthew felt the weight of every eye upon them. He straightened his back, ignoring the twinge of pain from his earlier injuries. "You will recount the events that transpired at the defense installation," the same voice continued, belonging to a Trillion official with deep blue skin and piercing silver eyes. Matthew and Ella took turns explaining their mission, from the initial infiltration to the final confrontation with Commander Zorn. As they spoke, Matthew noticed the council members leaning forward, their attention rapt. He emphasized their teamwork, how Ella's technological expertise complemented his combat skills. "And how exactly did you manage to override the ion cannon's targeting system?" a human delegate inquired, his brow furrowed. Ella's skin pulsed with a soft glow as she answered, "I combined Trillion logic with human unpredictability. It was Captain Reeves who suggested I think like a human." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Matthew caught sight of several council members, exchanging meaningful glances. As the questioning continued, a new figure entered the room. Tall and imposing, with skin that shimmered like polished obsidian, he moved with an air of authority that silenced the chamber. "Ambassador Krell," the blue-skinned official acknowledged, "your input on this matter would be most valuable." Krell's gaze swept over Matthew and Ella, his expression unreadable. "While their actions were undoubtedly heroic, I have concerns about the growing closeness between Captain Reeves and Liaison Zareth. Such intimacy could compromise the objectivity of our negotiations." Matthew felt his jaw clench. He opened his mouth to protest, but Ella's gentle touch on his arm stopped him. "With all due respect, Ambassador," Ella spoke, her voice calm but firm, "our cooperation was crucial to the mission's success. It demonstrates the potential of human-Trillion collaboration." Krell's eyes narrowed. "Collaboration is one thing, but there are boundaries that must be maintained for the sake of diplomatic integrity." The debate that followed was heated, with council members and delegates arguing the merits and risks of interspecies relationships. Matthew found himself growing increasingly frustrated, wanting to defend his connection with Ella, but unsure how to do so without proving Krell's point. Suddenly, a human aide burst into the chamber, datapad in hand. "Urgent message from Earth," he announced, his voice cutting through the arguments. The room fell silent as the message was read aloud. Earth's government, having learned of the foiled attack, was demanding stricter security measures. The threat to withdraw from negotiations hung heavy in the air. Matthew watched as the faces of both human and Trillion officials grew grave. The fragile alliance they had been building was on the verge of collapse. It was in this tense moment that the Trillion High Council made their bold proposal. A cultural exchange program with a small group of humans living among the Trillions for an extended period. Matthew felt a surge of excitement as Ella was nominated to coordinate the program. "I volunteer," Matthew said, stepping forward. "This program could be exactly what we need to strengthen our alliance and foster deeper understanding between our species." Ambassador Krell's voice cut through the murmurs of approval. "This is precisely what I warned against. We cannot allow uncontrolled fraternization between humans and Trillions. The risks are too great." As Krell's opposition gained traction, Matthew saw Ella's expression change. She took a deep breath, her skin pulsing with an intense glow. Honored council members, Ella began, her voice clear and strong. There is something you should know. An ancient Trillian prophecy speaks of a union between our people and a race from the stars. Could it be that the humans are the fulfillment of this prediction? The chamber erupted in a cacophony of voices. Matthew watched in awe as Ella's words seemed to shift the tide of the debate. Even Krell looked taken aback. As the meeting drew to a close, the human delegation requested time to consult with Earth about the cultural exchange program. The council agreed, but with a caveat: Matthew and Ella were to remain under observation. Exhausted but buzzing with adrenaline, Matthew followed Ella out of the chamber. They found themselves in a secluded garden within the diplomatic complex, lush with alien flora that pulsed with bioluminescence. That was intense, Matthew said, running a hand through his hair. Ella nodded, her skin shimmering in the garden's ethereal light. Matthew, about the prophecy. Before she could continue, Matthew closed the distance between them. His hand reached out, fingers tracing the contours of her face. Ella's skin glowed brighter at his touch, tiny sparks of energy dancing where their skin met. Their moment of intimacy was interrupted by the arrival of a Trillian with flowing silver robes and skin that shimmered like mother of pearl. Dr. Lyra, Ella greeted, her voice a mix of surprise and resignation. The Trillian xenobiologist's eyes gleamed with scientific curiosity as she looked between Matthew and Ella. I apologize for the interruption, but I have a proposal that could be crucial for the success of the cultural exchange program. Matthew listened as Dr. Lyra explained her idea for a series of medical examinations to study human Trillian biological compatibility. He felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension, aware of the potential implications of such a study. Exchanging a look with Ella, Matthew saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes. With a nod of mutual agreement, they turned to Dr. Lyra. We'll do it, Matthew said, reaching for Ella's hand. As they followed Dr. Lyra towards her laboratory, Matthew couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into uncharted territory, both personally and for their species. Whatever lay ahead, he was glad to have Ella by his side. As they entered Dr. Lyra's laboratory, Matthew felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness coursing through him. The lab was a marvel of Trillian technology, filled with sleek, pulsating equipment that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Holographic displays flickered to life as Dr. Lyra approached, casting an ethereal glow across her pearlescent skin. Please make yourselves comfortable, Dr. Lyra said, gesturing to two examination tables that looked more like sculptures than medical equipment. We'll begin with some basic physical scans. Matthew and Ella exchanged a glance before settling onto the tables. As they lay back, a dome of energy enveloped each of them, tingling against their skin. Fascinating, Dr. Lyra murmured, her eyes darting between the holographic readouts. There are remarkable similarities in your genetic structures. It's as if your species were designed to be compatible. As the examination progressed, Matthew found himself increasingly aware of Ella's presence. Her skin seemed to pulse with a soft light, drawing his gaze. He noticed her eyes lingering on him as well, a warmth building between them that had nothing to do with the energy field surrounding them. Dr. Lyra's voice cut through the tension. Now, we'll move on to a more intimate scan. This will measure your physiological responses to each other's presence. The energy field shifted, bringing Matthew and Ella closer together. As their bodies neared, Matthew felt a rush of heat through his veins. Ella's skin flared with bioluminescence, tiny sparks dancing across her surface. Extraordinary, Dr. Lyra breathed, her fingers flying over the controls. Your bodies are producing a unique combination of pheromones and hormones. The attraction between you is not just emotional, but deeply physiological. Matthew's heart raced as he looked into Ella's eyes, seeing his own desire reflected back at him. The air between them seemed to crackle with energy. We'll now move on to testing your mental and emotional compatibility, Dr. Lyra announced, seemingly oblivious to the charged atmosphere. The next series of tests pushed Matthew and Ella to their limits. They solved complex puzzles, their minds working in perfect synchronization. In simulated crisis scenarios, they moved as one, anticipating each other's actions with uncanny precision. As they completed the final simulation, Matthew caught Ella's hand in his. The touch sent a jolt through both of them, their bodies humming with shared energy. "The final phase," Dr. Lyra said, her voice tinged with excitement, "will test your ability to adapt to each other's native environments." Matthew and Ella were ushered into a sealed chamber. As the atmosphere shifted, Matthew felt a momentary discomfort, his lungs adapting to the alien air. He watched in awe as Ella's skin rippled, adjusting to the Earth-like conditions. In the confined space, their bodies pressed close together. Matthew could feel the heat radiating from Ella's skin, could smell the intoxicating scent that was uniquely hers. Without conscious thought, his hands found her waist, pulling her closer. Ella's skin pulsed with light as she leaned into him. Their lips met in a kiss that sent shockwaves through both their bodies. Matthew felt as if he were touching a live wire, energy coursing through every nerve. Suddenly, a blaring alarm shattered the moment. They broke apart, disoriented and gasping for breath. "Warning! Security breach," a mechanical voice announced. "Initiating lockdown procedures." Through the chamber's window, they could see Dr. Lyra frantically working at her console. The lab's doors sealed shut with a hiss of hydraulics. "What's happening?" Matthew called out. Dr. Lyra's face was grim as she turned to them. "Ambassador Krell has initiated a facility-wide lockdown. He's suspended the cultural exchange program, citing dangerous xenophilic activities." Matthew's military training kicked in. He scanned the room, assessing potential escape routes. "We need to get out of here. If Krell gets his hands on your research—" Ella nodded, her eyes sharp with focus. "There's a maintenance shaft connected to this chamber. We can use it to reach the central hub." Dr. Lyra hurried to a workstation, her fingers flying over the controls. "I'm downloading the examination data now. We can't let Krell destroy this evidence." As the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the lab, Matthew helped Dr. Lyra pry open the hidden access panel. The maintenance shaft yawned before them, a dark tunnel leading into uncertainty. "Quickly," Matthew urged, helping Ella into the shaft. He turned to Dr. Lyra, who clutched a small data device to her chest. "Do you have everything?" She nodded, her pearl-like skin dimmed with worry. "Everything we need to prove the validity of human trillion compatibility." As they squeezed into the cramped shaft, the sound of Krell's security team attempting to override the lab's locks grew louder. Matthew pulled the access panel shut behind them, plunging them into darkness, broken only by the soft glow of Ella's skin. "We need to reach the High Council," Ella whispered as they began to crawl through the tunnel. "It's our only chance to stop Krell and save the peace negotiations." Matthew nodded, his mind focused. As they made their way through the twisting passages of the maintenance shaft, he couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a short time. What had begun as a simple mission had evolved into something far more complex and personal. With Ella leading the way, her bioluminescent skin providing a soft guide in the darkness, and Dr. Lyra bringing up the rear with her precious cargo of data, Matthew steeled himself for the challenges ahead. They weren't just fighting for their own futures now, but for the future of human trillion relations. The maintenance shaft stretched on before them, a labyrinth of metal and shadow. As they crawled forward, the sounds of the lockdown faded behind them, replaced by the quiet hum of the diplomatic complex's inner workings. Their journey to the High Council had only just begun, and with it, the race to prevent a diplomatic catastrophe and prove that the bond between humans and trillions could overcome any obstacle. As they crept through the dimly lit shaft, the soft glow of Ella's skin provided just enough light to navigate. The air grew thick and stale, filled with the acrid scent of machine oil and the faint hum of distant machinery. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the complex, the sound muffled but still audible through the metal walls surrounding them. Matthew's heart raced as he realized their escape had been discovered. "We need to move faster," he whispered urgently. They picked up their pace, crawling as quickly as they could through the narrow space. After what felt like an eternity, Ella's hand found a panel in the ceiling. "Here," she said, pushing it open. They emerged into a secluded utility room, dim emergency lights casting long shadows across unfamiliar equipment. As they caught their breath, Dr. Lyra immediately made her way to a nearby terminal. Her fingers flew across the interface, her pearlescent skin reflecting the glow of the screen. "Ambassador Krell has initiated a facility-wide lockdown," she reported, her voice tight with concern. "He's spreading propaganda about the dangers of human-trillion relations." Matthew's lips pursed. "We need to get to the High Council chambers and present our findings. It's the only way to stop this madness." Ella nodded, her bioluminescence pulsing with dedication. "I know the layout of this complex. There are lesser-known corridors and service areas we can use to avoid the main security checkpoints." "Good," Matthew said, his military training kicking in. "We'll need to move quickly and quietly. Dr. Lyra, is there any way we can disguise ourselves?" The xenobiologist glanced around the room, her eyes lighting up as she spotted a storage locker. "Here," she said, pulling out lab coats and identification badges. "These should help us blend in with the facility staff." As they donned their disguises, Matthew outlined their plan. "Ella, you take point. Guide us through the complex. I'll bring up the rear and watch for any signs of pursuit. Dr. Lyra, stay between us and keep that data safe." They slipped out of the utility room and into the corridors of the diplomatic complex. The once bustling hallways were now eerily empty, the lockdown having cleared most personnel from the area. They moved swiftly, Ella's intimate knowledge of the facility proving invaluable as she led them through a maze of service corridors and rarely used passageways. As they approached their first security checkpoint, Matthew felt his pulse quicken. A pair of trillion guards stood at attention, their skin shimmering with heightened alertness. "Follow my lead," Ella whispered, straightening her lab coat. She approached the guards with confident strides, Matthew and Dr. Lyra close behind. "Urgent business for the High Council," she stated, flashing her stolen ID badge. "We need to pass immediately." The guards hesitated for a moment, their eyes narrowing as they scrutinized the trio. Matthew held his breath, acutely aware of how alien he must appear to them. "Very well," one of the guards finally said, stepping aside. "Proceed." They made it through 2 more checkpoints in similar fashion, Matthew's quick thinking and Ella's smooth talking allowing them to pass undetected. But as they approached the final checkpoint before the council chambers, their luck ran out. A guard's eyes widened in recognition as they drew near. "You!" he exclaimed, pointing at Matthew. "You're the human diplomat!" Time seemed to slow as the guard reached for his communication device. In that split second, Matthew made a decision. He lunged forward, his human strength and agility catching the trillion off guard. With a swift strike, he knocked the device from the guard's hand. Chaos erupted in the checkpoint. Ella sprang into action, her knowledge of trillion physiology allowing her to incapacitate several guards with precise strikes to their pressure points. Matthew engaged the remaining guards in hand-to-hand combat, his military training giving him an edge despite their alien physiology. Dr. Lyra, though not a fighter, proved her worth by accessing a nearby terminal. With a few quick commands, she sealed off adjacent corridors and triggered false alarms, buying them valuable time and sowing confusion among Krell's forces. As they fought their way through the checkpoint, Matthew caught glimpses of Ella in action. Her movements were fluid and graceful, her skin pulsing with an intense light that seemed to disorient her opponents. He felt a surge of admiration and something deeper, a connection that transcended their different species. Finally, they broke through the last line of defense. The doors to the High Council chambers loomed before them, their ornate surface a stark contrast to the chaos they had just endured. "Ready?" Matthew asked, looking at Ella and Dr. Lyra. They nodded, persistence etched on their faces. With a deep breath, Matthew pushed open the doors, and they rushed into the council chambers. The scene that greeted them was one of tense standoff. On one side stood Ambassador Krell and his loyalists, their faces contorted with anger and fear. On the other, members of the High Council and those loyal to them, their expressions a mix of confusion and dedication. All eyes turned to Matthew, Ella, and Dr. Lyra as they burst into the room. "Stop this madness," Matthew shouted, his voice ringing through the chamber. "We have proof that humans and trillions are compatible. There's no need for conflict between our species." Krell's eyes widened in panic. "Don't listen to them," he cried, lunging for Dr. Lyra and the precious data she carried. Matthew reacted instinctively, tackling Krell to the ground. As they grappled, Ella and Dr. Lyra rushed to present their findings to the council. "Esteemed council members," Dr. Lyra began, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Our research has uncovered remarkable similarities in human and trillion genetic structures. The implications are extraordinary. Her words were cut short by a piercing, high-frequency sound that filled the chamber. Matthew watched in horror as Ella and the other trillions collapsed, their bodies convulsing in pain. Krell had broken free and activated a hidden device, a cruel smile twisting his features. "You see," he shouted over the noise, "humans are a threat to our very existence." Unaffected by the sound due to his human physiology, Matthew scanned the room frantically. His eyes locked onto the source of the sound, a small device clutched in Krell's hand. With a burst of speed, Matthew charged across the chamber. Krell's eyes widened in surprise as Matthew closed the distance between them. In one fluid motion, Matthew wrenched the device from Krell's grasp and smashed it against the ground. The high-frequency sound cut off abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. As the trillions began to recover, Matthew rushed to Ella's side, cradling her in his arms. "Ella," he whispered, his voice thick with concern, "are you all right?" She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. A weak smile spread across her face as she looked up at him. "Matthew," she murmured, her skin pulsing softly. The intimate moment between them did not go unnoticed. The council members watched with a mix of fascination and uncertainty, their previous hostility melting away in the face of this display of genuine care between human and trillion. As Ella regained her strength, Matthew helped her to her feet. They stood together, hand in hand, facing the council. Dr. Lyra stepped forward, her face grim. "Ambassador Krell managed to delete a portion of our research data," she reported. "But what remains is still compelling evidence of human-trillion compatibility." She activated a holographic display, filling the chamber with images and data from their examinations. The council members leaned forward, their eyes wide as they absorbed the implications of what they were seeing. Just as the mood in the chamber began to shift, a loud beep cut through the air. A trillion communications officer hurried into the room, a look of panic on his face. "Honored council members," he announced, his voice trembling, "we've received an urgent message from the human delegation. Earth has learned of the situation here and is demanding an immediate explanation." The officer paused, his next words sending a chill through the room. "A human warship has been dispatched to our system as a precautionary measure." The chamber erupted into chaos, council members shouting over one another as they debated the best course of action. Matthew and Ella stood in the eye of the storm, their hands still intertwined. As the uproar continued around them, Matthew met Ella's gaze. In her eyes, he saw a reflection of his own grit and hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The fate of human-trillion relations hung in the balance, with their relationship at the center of the storm. As the council argued and the threat of interstellar conflict loomed, Matthew and Ella knew that their next steps would determine not only their future together, but also the future of their respective species. Species hung in the balance. The council chamber buzzed with frantic voices as the news of the approaching human warship sent shockwaves through the assembled dignitaries. Matthew's mind raced, searching for a solution to prevent an interstellar incident. He squeezed Ella's hand, drawing strength from their connection. In that moment of clarity, an idea struck him. "Wait!" Matthew's voice cut through the din, silencing the chamber. All eyes turned to him as he stepped forward, still holding Ella's hand. "I have a proposal that might diffuse this situation." The council members regarded him with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Matthew took a deep breath and continued, "We need to show both our peoples that humans and trillions can coexist peacefully. I suggest we host a live, interstellar broadcast demonstrating our compatibility." Murmurs rippled through the chamber as the council members considered his words. Matthew pressed on. "Ella and I will be the focal point. We'll showcase how our species can work together, complement each other's strengths." The head of the council, a wizened trillion with iridescent skin, leaned forward. "And how do you propose to do this, human?" "A series of challenges," Matthew explained, his voice growing more confident. "We'll create an obstacle course that combines elements from both Earth and Trilia. Ella and I will navigate it together, demonstrating our ability to cooperate in various environments." The council members exchanged glances, their bioluminescent skin pulsing with a mix of emotions. After a tense moment, the head counselor nodded. "Very well. We have little choice given the circumstances. Prepare your broadcast." The chamber burst into action. Trillion technicians rushed to set up a makeshift studio within the diplomatic complex, while others established a secure connection with the approaching human warship. Matthew and Ella found themselves whisked away to prepare for their roles. As they were fitted with specialized suits designed to enhance the visual impact of their performance, Matthew turned to Ella. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his voice low. Ella's skin rippled with a pattern that Matthew had come to recognize as nervousness. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "The fate of both our species rests on our shoulders." Matthew gently touched her arm, feeling the unique texture of her skin beneath his fingers. "We can do this," he assured her. Together. As the final preparations were made, Dr. Lyra approached them, her face etched with concern. "The human warship has entered the Trillion system," she reported. "We're out of time." Matthew nodded grimly. "Then let's give them a show they won't forget." The broadcast began with a brief introduction from the Trillion High Council, explaining the situation to viewers on both planets. Then, the camera focused on Matthew and Ella as they stood at the entrance to the hastily constructed obstacle course. "Ready?" Matthew asked, flashing Ella a reassuring smile. She nodded, her skin pulsing with purpose. "Let's do this." They plunged into the course, immediately faced with a series of physical challenges. Matthew's strength and agility complemented Ella's flexibility and spatial awareness as they navigated narrow tunnels and scaled towering structures. One obstacle required them to cross a chasm using a combination of Trillion bioluminescence and human ingenuity. Ella's skin glowed brightly, illuminating hidden footholds that Matthew used to construct a makeshift bridge. As they crossed together, viewers on both planets watched in awe at their seamless teamwork. Another challenge tested their problem-solving skills. They faced a complex puzzle that combined Earth mathematics with Trillion spatial reasoning. Working in tandem, they deciphered the solution, their minds bridging the gap between two vastly different ways of thinking. As they progressed through the course, the chemistry between Matthew and Ella became undeniable, their movements synchronized, anticipating each other's needs without a word. The broadcast captured every moment, from shared glances of triumph to the gentle brush of hands as they helped each other over obstacles. During a brief intermission, Dr. Lyra rushed to them, her eyes wide with excitement. "I've analyzed the remaining data," she said breathlessly. "There's something you need to know." Matthew and Ella listened intently as Dr. Lyra explained her discovery. Prolonged close contact between humans and Trillions triggered a unique biochemical reaction, enhancing both species' natural abilities. This revelation could revolutionize medical treatments and technological advancements for both races. Energized by this news, Matthew and Ella returned to the broadcast with renewed purpose. They decided to demonstrate this enhancement in real time, aware of the risk but driven by the potential impact. As they joined hands, their bodies began to glow faintly, visible to the cameras and the millions of viewers watching across two worlds. Matthew felt a surge of strength course through him, his movements becoming faster and more precise. Beside him, Ella's mind raced with newfound clarity, solving complex Trillion puzzles with unprecedented speed. The audience watched in stunned silence as Matthew lifted a massive Trillion structure that would normally require multiple individuals, while Ella rapidly decoded a series of Earth languages she had never encountered before. Caught up in the exhilaration of the moment and the intense emotions of their shared experience, Matthew and Ella turned to each other. Their eyes met, a wordless understanding passing between them. In a spontaneous gesture that would be replayed countless times in the days to come, they leaned in and shared a passionate kiss on live interstellar television. The unexpected display of affection sent shockwaves through viewers on both planets. For many, it was a moment of revelation, humanizing the alien races to each other in a way no diplomatic negotiations ever could. As they broke apart, both slightly dazed by the intensity of the moment, the sound of applause filled the air. It started in the studio and quickly spread, echoing through the broadcast as viewers on both planets joined in. The camera panned out to show the Trillion High Council chamber, where even the most stoic members were visibly moved. The head counselor stepped forward, raising a hand for silence. "We have received a communication from the human warship," he announced, his voice carrying a note of relief. "In light of this remarkable demonstration of unity and the potential benefits of human trillion cooperation, they have offered to stand down and act as an honor guard for continued diplomatic relations." A cheer erupted from the assembled trillions and the handful of humans present. Matthew and Ella embraced, their bodies still glowing faintly from the biochemical enhancement. As the excitement began to settle, a commotion near the back of the chamber caught everyone's attention. Ambassador Krell, his face contorted with rage, pushed his way through the crowd. "This changes nothing," he shouted, waving a data pad in the air. "I have proof that the Trillions have been developing weapons capable of destroying the human fleet. We cannot trust them." The room fell silent as Krell's words hung in the air. Matthew felt Ella tense beside him, preparing for the worst. But before anyone could react, a voice came over the intercom system. "This is Captain Elena Rodriguez of the human warship Horizon," the voice announced. "We've intercepted Ambassador Krell's transmission and reviewed the documents he attempted to release." Matthew held his breath, acutely aware of how quickly the situation could spiral out of control. But Captain Rodriguez's next words took everyone by surprise. "Ambassador Krell," she continued, her voice firm, "your attempt to sow discord has failed. The human delegation is impressed by the advanced technology demonstrated in these documents. Instead of reacting with fear, we propose a joint defense initiative to further strengthen the bonds between our species." The chamber erupted into cheers once more as Trillion security forces moved to detain the stunned Ambassador Krell. Matthew and Ella watched as he was led away, his plans for conflict crumbling before his eyes. As the broadcast came to an end, Matthew and Ella found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. The Trillion High Council and human delegation were already discussing plans for a joint scientific task force to explore the full potential of human-trillion biochemical synergy, with Dr. Lyra at the helm. Amid the chaos, Matthew and Ella slipped away to a quiet balcony overlooking the Trillion capital city. The human warship Horizon hovered peacefully in the sky above, a symbol of the crisis averted and the new era of cooperation dawning. As they stood together, their hands intertwined and their bodies still faintly glowing, Matthew turned to Ella. "So," he said with a small smile, "what do you think about being the first official human trillion couple?" Ella's skin rippled with a pattern that Matthew now recognized as joy. "I think," she replied, her voice soft but filled with conviction, "that our journey is just beginning." They gazed out at the city below, where humans and trillions were already beginning to mingle more freely. The challenges of merging two distinct cultures and biologies lay ahead, but as Matthew and Ella stood together, they felt ready to face whatever came next. They had taken the first steps towards a future neither of them could have imagined, and they would forge the path for others to follow. Their love had become a beacon of hope for both species, a living testament to the possibilities that lay ahead. In the months that followed, Matthew and Ella's relationship blossomed, becoming the cornerstone of human trillion relations. Their unique bond captivated the imaginations of both races, inspiring countless others to reach across the divide between their species. As the first anniversary of their broadcast approached, Matthew and Ella found themselves at the center of another momentous occasion. They were preparing for their wedding, the first officially recognized human trillion union in history. The excitement was palpable as the day drew near. The Trillion capital buzzed with activity, decorated with a blend of human and trillion symbols. Delegates from both worlds arrived daily, eager to witness this historic event. On the eve of their wedding, Matthew and Ella stood on the balcony of their shared quarters, overlooking the city. The faint glow of their biochemical bond illuminated their intertwined hands. "Can you believe it?" Matthew asked, his voice soft with wonder. "A year ago, we were strangers from different worlds. Now," Ella's skin rippled with a pattern of joy and nervousness. "Now we're about to make history again," she finished, leaning into him. Their moment of peace was interrupted by an urgent knock at the door. Dr. Lyra burst in, her face etched with concern. "There's a problem," she said, her voice tight. A group of human religious extremists has arrived on Trilia. They're protesting against your union, calling it unnatural. There are threats to disrupt the ceremony. Matthew's teeth clenched, while Ella's skin pulsed with a pattern of alarm. They exchanged a determined look, their bond glowing brighter. "We've come too far to let them stop us now," Matthew said firmly. Ella nodded in agreement. "We'll face this together, like we've faced everything else." They spent the night in urgent meetings with security teams from both planets, devising strategies to ensure the safety of their guests and the sanctity of their ceremony. As dawn broke on their wedding day, Matthew and Ella woke to alarming news. The extremists had managed to take control of the wedding venue, a beautiful Trillian structure chosen for its ability to accommodate both species comfortably. "This is it," Matthew said, his military training kicking in. "We're not going to let them ruin our day." Ella's skin shimmered with tenacity. "Agreed. What's the plan?" Matthew quickly contacted his old military unit, while Ella reached out to a group of trusted Trillian security forces. Within an hour, they had assembled a joint team, ready to reclaim the venue. As guests began to arrive, unaware of the unfolding drama, Matthew and Ella led their team through the building's underground maintenance tunnels. Their unique biochemical bond enhanced their abilities, with Matthew's strength allowing them to break through barriers and Ella's heightened senses, detecting hidden extremists. They moved swiftly and silently through the tunnels, their bodies glowing faintly in the darkness. Matthew's muscles rippled with enhanced strength as he pried open a stuck maintenance hatch. Ella's eyes, now capable of seeing in near-total darkness, scanned the path ahead. "Two hostiles, 50 meters ahead," she whispered, her skin pulsing with a pattern that Matthew recognized as focused concentration. Matthew nodded, signaling to the team behind them. They approached cautiously, using non-lethal tactics to subdue the extremists. The human and Trillian forces worked in perfect harmony, their movements synchronized and efficient. As they secured each section of the building, Matthew and Ella's confidence grew. Their bond seemed to strengthen with each challenge, their abilities becoming more pronounced. Finally, they reached the main hall, where the ceremony was to take place. Through the doors, they could hear the voice of the extremist leader, ranting about the supposed dangers of human Trillian integration. Matthew and Ella shared a look, their bond glowing brightly. With a nod, Matthew kicked open the doors, and they strode in side by side. The extremist leader, a tall, gaunt man with wild eyes, whirled to face them. His followers, caught off guard by the sudden intrusion, fumbled for their weapons. "Stop!" Ella's voice rang out, clear and commanding. Her skin pulsed with a hypnotic pattern, drawing all eyes to her. "We don't want violence. We're here to talk." The extremist leader sneered, raising his weapon. "There's nothing to discuss. This abomination cannot be allowed to continue." Matthew tensed, ready to spring into action, but Ella placed a calming hand on his arm. She took a step forward, her skin glowing with an intense, mesmerizing light. "Look at us," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Really look. Do you see an abomination? Or do you see two beings who love each other, who want to build a future together?" The leader's hand wavered, his eyes fixed on the soft glow emanating from Matthew and Ella's joined hands. "This bond between us," Ella continued, "it's not just biological. It's a symbol of what our species can achieve together. We're stronger united than we ever were apart." As she spoke, Matthew slowly approached the leader. In one swift motion, he disarmed the man, handing the weapon to a nearby security officer. The leader's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. I don't understand," he muttered, his eyes darting between Matthew and Ella. "You don't have to understand right now," Matthew said, his voice kind but firm. "But we're asking you to open your mind to the possibility that there's more to this universe than you've allowed yourself to see." With the situation diffused, security teams quickly rounded up the remaining extremists. As they were led away, the leader turned back to Matthew and Ella. I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I think I need to reconsider some things." As the last of the extremists were escorted out, Matthew turned to Ella, a smile spreading across his face. "Well," he said, "that's one way to start our wedding day." Ella's skin rippled with a pattern of amusement and relief. "Indeed," she replied. Now, shall we get married? With the venue secured, the wedding preparations resumed at a frantic pace. Guests filed in, buzzing with excitement over the rumors of the morning's events. The ceremony itself was a beautiful blend of human and Trillian traditions, symbolizing the union not just of two individuals but of two cultures. As Matthew and Ella exchanged vows, their biochemical bond visibly intensified. A soft, warm glow enveloped them, eliciting gasps of awe from the assembled guests. Their words, spoken in both human and Trillian languages, echoed through the hall, a promise of love and unity that transcended species. The reception that followed was a joyous celebration of their love and the bright future ahead for both races. As the party reached its peak, Dr. Lyra approached the newlyweds, her eyes shining with excitement. "I have incredible news," she announced, her voice barely containing her enthusiasm. "The latest results from my research, they're groundbreaking." Matthew and Ella listened intently as Dr. Lyra explained her findings. Their union, it seemed, had unlocked new potential in human Trillian biochemistry. The unique combination of their DNA had created a breakthrough in medical science, offering potential cures for diseases that had long plagued both species. As the implications of this news sank in, Matthew and Ella shared a look of wonder. Their love, once considered impossible, was now paving the way for advancements that could save countless lives. The celebration took on a new energy, with guests from both planets mingling freely, discussing the possibilities that lay ahead. In the midst of it all, Matthew pulled Ella aside, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "I have a surprise for you," he said, his voice low. "We've been selected to lead the first joint human Trillian space exploration mission." Ella's skin pulsed with a vibrant pattern of joy and anticipation. "Really? Oh, Matthew, that's incredible." As the reception began to wind down, Matthew and Ella slipped away from the crowds. Hand in hand, they made their way to a small Trillian shuttle waiting nearby. The vessel, decorated with "Just Married" in both human and Trillian script, hummed to life as they approached. They boarded the shuttle, waving goodbye to their cheering guests as the door sealed behind them. As the shuttle took off, carrying them towards the first human Trillian space station orbiting the planet, Matthew and Ella settled into their seats, their bodies still glowing faintly from their bond. "So," Matthew said, turning to his new wife with a smile, "ready for our next adventure?" Ella's skin shimmered with a pattern that Matthew had come to recognize as pure happiness. "With you, always," she replied, leaning in for a kiss as the stars streaked past their window, a whole universe of possibilities stretching out before them.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.